In the beginning, God created everything, and He said it was good.
God saved His best creation for last. He made people in His very image and breathed His own breath into them, giving them life. They would be His children, and the world would be their perfect home. God loved His creation with His whole heart, and they were lovely because He loved them. His name was Adam, and her name was Eve. They lived in a beautiful garden where everything was perfect and wonderful. They even got to walk around and talk with their Creator Himself. Everything was perfect until God gave Adam and Eve some instructions. Don't eat from that tree over there. Then along came the serpent, the most cunning beast in the garden. He asked Eve, "Did God really say you couldn't eat of this tree?" He whispered poison into Eve's heart. He was really asking, does God know what's best for you? Does He really love you? Maybe He doesn't want you to be happy. Just one small bite and you'll be happier than you've ever been before. And so they ate some. Then they realized they didn't have any clothes, so they hid behind some bushes. And the father came looking for his children, and they didn't run out to meet him like usual. "Where are you?" he asked. "We're hiding. We're scared of you, because we don't have any clothes on." You see, sin had entered God's perfect world, and it would never leave. Lies had filled the hearts of God's children, and now instead of running to God, now they're running away from God. "This is no longer your perfect home," God told them. "You have to leave the garden now." So He sent them out, but before He did, He covered them with clothes.
This sounds like the end of a really depressing story, but it's not. God loved His people still, and even though they would be running away from Him, God loved His people with an always and forever love. God's people would miss Him. Their hearts would long to be with Him again, walking and chatting in the garden. Before He sent them from the garden, God promised that He would one day do battle with the serpent. He would crush him. One day, He would get rid of all the sin and the sadness and the darkness and the loneliness. One day, He would come back and rescue His people.
Soon everyone had forgotten about God except for Noah and his family. God asked Noah to build an ark, and He filled him and his family in it with animals from all over the world. God sent a flood to destroy everything on earth. His world would have a new beginning. It wouldn't take very long for everything to go wrong again. One day, God asked a man named Abraham, "How many stars are in the sky, and how many little pieces of sand are at the beach?" "More than I can count," Abraham answered. And God said, "Guess what, Abraham? You're going to have many children and great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren that you won't be able to count them either. And from your family, I'm going to rescue the world."
God's people, Abraham's family, grew and were now slaves in Egypt. God used Moses to save His people. After 10 plagues, a cloud by day, fire by night, and a parted sea, the people were finally free from Pharaoh. They found themselves in the wilderness, tired, hungry, sore, and a little bit whiny. They had already forgotten how wonderful God was, so He gave them food and water. Then God gave Moses the 10 Commandments, 10 ways to follow God and be perfect. "Can you do it? Will you follow these rules and love God?" Moses asked. "We will, of course we will," the people answered. But they didn't. They couldn't, and God knew that. But He wanted His people to know it too.
God's people were finally in the land He promised them. They had a hard time remembering to love God and each other. They looked around and saw that everyone else had a king, so they decided they needed one too. "But God is your king," Samuel told them. "A human king only means trouble." But the people didn't care. They wanted a king, and they wanted him now. So God gave them what they wanted. First they got Saul, and turns out he was only trouble. So God picked another king. He was a young shepherd boy who didn't seem all that special at all. But he loved God, and God loved him. And he became king over God's people. And one day, David's great-great-great-grandson would be king over the people. And he would be the perfect king.
After David's son Solomon was king, the kingdom split into two, and after that, the northern kingdom was taken away, never to be seen again. Things weren't much better in the south. The temple was destroyed, the people were slaves, and their city was in ruins. The people had forgotten God again, but God wanted them to remember him. He sent his prophets to speak his words to his people, to tell them, "Turn back to me or else. Turn back to me and I will rescue you." But they didn't. They were still running away from God. They didn't want to hear it so much that they killed his prophets. So God went silent for 400 years.
He's here. Everything was ready. The moment God had been waiting for was here at last. God was coming to help his people, just as he promised in the beginning. But how would he come? What would he be like? What would he do? Mountains could have bowed down. Seas could have roared. Trees could have clapped their hands. But instead, the earth held its breath. As silent as snow falling, he came in. And when no one was looking, in the darkness, he came. There was a young girl, Mary, who was engaged to a man named Joseph. Joseph was the great-great-great-great-great-grandson of King David. was Gabriel, and he was an angel, a special messenger from heaven. When she saw the tall, shining man standing there, Mary was frightened.
You don't need to be scared, Mary. You're going to have a baby, a little boy. You will call him Jesus. He is God's own son. He is the one. He is the rescuer.
The God who flung planets into space and kept them whirling around and around. The God who made the universe with just a word. The one who could do anything at all was making himself small and coming down as a baby? Wait, God was sending a baby to rescue the whole world?
But it's too wonderful. How can it be true?
Is anything too wonderful for God?
So Mary trusted God more than what her eyes could see, and she believed.
I'm God's servant. Whatever he says, I will do.
Sure enough, it was just as the angel had said. 9 months later, Mary was almost ready to have her baby. Now Mary and Joseph had to take a long trip to Bethlehem, the town King David was from. But when they reached the little town, they found every room was full. Every bed was taken. Where would they stay? Soon Mary's baby would come. They couldn't find anywhere except an old, tumble-down stable. They stayed where the cows and the donkeys and the horses stayed, and there in the stable, amongst the chickens and the donkeys and the cows, in the quiet of the night, God gave the world his wonderful gift. A baby that would change the world was born, his baby son. Mary and Joseph wrapped him up to keep him warm. They made a bed of straw and used the animal's feeding trough as his cradle. As they gazed in wonder at God's great gift, wrapped in swaddling clothes and lying in a manger, Mary and Joseph named him Jesus, Emmanuel, which means God has come to live with us, because of course he had.
That same night, amongst the other stars, suddenly a bright new star appeared. Of all the stars in the dark vaulted heavens, this one shone clearer. It blazed in the night and made the other stars look pale beside it. God put it there when his baby son was born, to be like a spotlight, shining on him, lighting up the darkness, showing people the way to him. You see, God was like a new dad. He couldn't keep the good news to himself. He'd been waiting all these long years for this moment, and now he wanted to tell everyone. So he put out all the stops. He sent an angel to tell Mary the good news. He put a special star in the sky to show where his boy was. And now he was going to send a big choir of angels to sing his happy happy song to the world.
He's here.
He's come. Go and see him.
My little boy.
Now, where would you send your splendid choir? To LA or New York City? Maybe even the White House? Well, God sent his to a little hillside, outside a little town, in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night. He sent all those angels to sing for a raggedy old bunch of shepherds, watching their sheep outside of Bethlehem. In those days, people used to laugh at shepherds and say they were smelly, and call them other rude names, which I can't possibly mention in church. You see, people thought shepherds were nobodies, just scruffy old riffraff. But God must have thought shepherds were very important indeed, because they're the ones he chose to tell the good news to first. That night, some shepherds were out in the open field, warming themselves by a campfire, when suddenly the sheep were frightened by something. The olive trees rustled. What was that? A winged bee? They turned around. Standing in front of them was a huge warrior of light, blazing in the darkness.
You don't need to be scared of me. I haven't come to hurt you. I've come to bring you good news for everyone everywhere.
Today in David's town in Bethlehem, God has been born.
It did.
You can go sleeping in a manger.
Behind the angel, they saw a strange glowing cloud. Except it wasn't a cloud. It was angels. Troops and troops of angels, armed with light.
That's fine.
Guys.
We're gonna go back to Noah.
The shepherds stamped out their fire, left their sheep, raced down the grassy hill, through the gates of Bethlehem, down the narrow cobble streets, through a courtyard, down some steps, past and in around a corner, through a hedge, until at last they reached a tumble-down stable. They caught their breath, and quietly they tiptoed inside. They knelt on the dirt floor. They had heard about this promised child, and now he was here, heaven's son, the maker of the stars, a baby sleeping in his mother's arms. This baby would be like that bright star shining in the night sky that night, a light to light up the whole world, chasing away darkness, helping people to see, and the darker the night got, the brighter the star would shine.
Far away in the east, 3 or so clever men saw the very same star, the star that God had put in the sky when Jesus was born. They knew it was a sign. A baby king had been born. They had been waiting for the star. They knew it would come. Yay! There was much shouting, and I'm sure if you'd been there, you would have heard them laughing and dancing and singing until the sun came up. At dawn, they packed up their camels and wrapped gifts for the baby. They brought their most precious treasures of all, frankincense, gold, and myrrh. Special, sparkly, lovely smelling, gleaming things, just right for the king. And the wise men, actually, if you'd met them, you would have thought they were kings because they were so rich and clever and important looking, sent off. They rode their camels across endless deserts, up steep, steep mountains, down into deep, deep valleys, through raging rivers, over grassy plains, night and day and night, for hours that turned into days, that turned into weeks, that turned into months and months, until, at last, they reached Jerusalem. Jerusalem was by far the most important city for miles around, and as anyone can tell you, that's where a palace would be. And kings are usually born in palaces, so that's where they went. But they were in for a surprise. They went to see King Herod. Surely he'd know where this baby was. But he didn't. In fact, he didn't like the sound of a new king. It made him cross. He didn't want anyone to be king, except, of course, himself. But Herod's advisors told the 3 or so wise men what was written in their books, what God had said about the baby. Go to Bethlehem. That's where you'll find him. Suddenly, the star they had seen in the east started moving again, so showing them the way. So the wise men followed the star, out of the big city, along the road, into the little town of Bethlehem, out of the nice part of town, through the not so nice part of town, into the really not so nice at all part of town at all, down a little dirt track, until it stopped right over a little house. But wait, it wasn't a palace. And there weren't any guards, or servants, or flags, or red carpets, or trumpets, or anything. Did they get it wrong? Could this be what God meant? Sure enough, in that little house, there, sitting on his mother's knee, they found him, the baby king. The 3 men knelt before the king. They took off their rich royal turbans and gleaming golden crowns. They bowed their noble heads to the ground and gave him their sparkling treasures. The journey that had begun so many centuries before had led the 3 or so wise men here, to a little town, to a little house, to a little child, to the king God had promised they would all those years before. But this child was a new kind of king. Though he was the Prince of Heaven, he had become poor. Though he was the mighty God, he had become a helpless baby. The king hadn't come to be a boss. He had come to be a servant. He had come to show us how to love and ultimately to save us all.